Good morning, students. We're going to look at the book of Ruth today. I want to thank everyone for your prayers and well wishes. We will be having class on Thursday. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord, help us to be able to understand this very important material. And thank you for all your mercies and grace, Lord. Be with these students and help them to work hard and be successful in all that they do. In Jesus' name, amen. So we will be having class on Thursday, October 7th, but we will not be having the exam that day. I would like for you to read 1 Samuel chapter 8, and that is Samuel advising the Israelites to not want a king and what the king would do, and the Israelites insisting to have a king. So be ready for that on Thursday. That would be um, a good quiz material. So we may have a quiz on that. Be ready in case we do. As I said, we will be having regular class Thursday morning, October 12th. We're going to push the exam back to next Tuesday, October 12th. That exam will be on our notes that we took on Joshua, the class presentations on Judges. In addition, yesterday, Monday, I sent out what was left of our judges' presentations. We will not have time now to get those presentations done. So I gave you that information. So do open that. Now I left blank when you open it up. The material that we did cover in class is still blank on that. I just filled in the material that we did not cover. If you missed class, you need to find someone, some way to get the notes that you missed on those presentations. So find somebody in class. Then we will also have Ruth, and then Thursday we will cover 1st and 2nd Samuel. On the exam, remember, notes are mandatory. So you have to bring your notes to the exam with you. Make sure that you have all your notes for each of these things. That's an important. I'm going to make that an important part of your grade for you to have written notes with you. All right, and then of course today we're going to cover in the next few minutes. We're going to cover the book of Ruth. Very small book, but a very important book. First, let's look at our Old Testament card. Fill out our Old Testament book cards for the book of Ruth. The purpose of the book of Ruth is to demonstrate faithfulness. Ruth is faithful to her mother-in-law Naomi. Naomi is faithful to the traditions of Israel and to her family. It is a book about loyalty, and it is a model for us. God showing us the love that He desires for us to have. And this is a rare treat in the Old Testament because most of the characters here behave well and behave in a way that's honoring to God, and that can be rather rare. Generally, the Old Testament is a book that has a lot of warning characters in it. The key texts are Ruth 1:16 and 4:14. We'll look at those as we go through. And a one-sentence summary for Ruth. Ruth, a Moabite widow. Now, the Moabites in general in the Old Testament are bad guys. And so this is another outsider like Rahab, who was a Canaanite. Ruth is a Moabite. Her husband dies. She faithfully cared for her mother-in-law, Naomi. So Naomi was an Israelite who lived in Moab. She had 2 sons, and Ruth married one of those sons. Her husband died. They went back to Israel, and Ruth was able to find a husband and redemption in Israel through her new husband, Boaz. Incidentally, Boaz was the kinsman redeemer, a relative of her deceased husband's land rights. And so we'll talk about what that means as we go through it. So Ruth, a Moabite widow who faithfully cared for her mother-in-law Naomi, found love and redemption in Israel through her new husband Boaz, the kinsman redeemer of her deceased husband's land rights. So here's an outline of the book of Ruth. chapter 1 is basically about Naomi and Ruth. So there is a tragedy in Moab. Elimelech family moves to Moab because there is a famine in Israel. Elimelech dies while they're there, and after marrying Moabite women, Elimelech's two sons also die. They leave three widows. So Naomi was married to Elimelech and he died. And then the two sons marry Orpah and Ruth. Now, as a side note, Orpah was the name that was intended for Oprah Winfrey. Her grandmother misspelled the name, the biblical name Orpah, and spelled it Oprah. And that's how she got her name. Just a side note there. And Ruth. So Orpah and Ruth were Moabite women. And their husbands died. That leaves you destitute. As I've told you before, in the ancient world, there's only three jobs for women. That is wife, daughter, and prostitute. And I guess we could include mother. If a man decides to take care of his mother, then that would work too. But the idea is a widow in the ancient world was destitute. The only option to support themselves would be prostitution. So these women were destitute. Naomi decides they are seeking a home, and Naomi decides to return to the land of Israel. Elimelech owned property there, but there's a big problem for Naomi. As a woman, she cannot own property. So even once they get there, they have to figure out a way to find support from their land. She can't sell the land and keep the money because she's a woman. So they're in a pinch here. There is faithful loyalty happens. The Hebrew word for faithful loyalty is chesed, and that's a godlike quality. God is chesed in Hebrew. He is faithful and loyal. And so a lot of this book is a story of people modeling godlike behavior. Naomi releases her daughters-in-law. So she says to them as she begins to return to Israel, go back and find you a husband in Moab. The daughter Orpah decides to return to Moab. However, Ruth decides to stay with Naomi. She exhibits faithful loyalty, chesed. Here's the verse. Ruth 1, chapter 16. Ruth replied to Naomi, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God, most importantly, your God will be my God. So chapter 2, the subject is Ruth meets Boaz. So as I said, they get there, they are destitute in the land, even though Naomi's husband owned property. So they're seeking provision. They're seeking food and a place to sleep, and so forth. So Ruth goes to a field to glean leftovers. So what that means is after they go through and they pick the produce from the field, there's always some waste that falls to the side. Ruth was going to pick up what was not processed and thrown on the big wagon to sell for food. And so in that way she could get some pickings and take them back, and her and Naomi could eat them. She happens to be gleaning from the field of Boaz. He is the landowner. And coincidentally, maybe not, Boaz is a relative of her deceased father-in-law Elimelech, maybe like a cousin of Elimelech, okay? And so probably Naomi sent her to a field of a relative, thinking there's a greater chance that they would get mercy and not be run off. You know, a landowner has the right to run a person off. So, knowing Ruth's kindness to Naomi, Boaz respects and protects Ruth. So Boaz, the relative, is aware that Ruth has been faithful to Naomi, so he allows her to glean from the field. He tells the men there, don't harm her, don't run her off. As we go to chapter 3, we go to the threshing floor where they collect the harvest and they are processing it to give it out. And in this part, we are seeking redemption. Okay, and talking about the land rights. Naomi's husband has land rights, but Naomi is powerless to get legal rights to that land. Okay, and so they are seeking redemption of property. Naomi sends Ruth to the threshing floor where Boaz is processing the harvest to convince Boaz to serve as a kinsman redeemer and marry Ruth. So Naomi says, put on your lipstick and go and be very nice to Boaz, because he could be our kinsman redeemer. Now, this is something we modern people are not very familiar with. What is a kinsman redeemer? In Hebrew, it is called a goel. And so Boaz willingly fulfilled the role of kinsman redeemer. When he was asked, he said, yes, I will do that. For Ruth, and thus he redeems Naomi's family rights. So what happens here is when he marries Boaz, and that is his cousin's widow, then he gets the land. He is the rightful owner of the land. And when he marries Ruth and they have a child, then that child will have the rights of Ruth's former husband. It's a little bit confusing. So he is a kinsman of Ruth's deceased husband, and he redeems the land so it stays in the family. So Ruth's children, Naomi's grandchildren, will receive the property that had belonged to Elimelech, her husband. As I say, we don't have anything quite like this today. But Boaz buys back the land that Elimelech had lost by passing away without a living male heir. Unfortunately, Boaz informs Ruth in chapter 3 that there is a closer relative than him. And that closer relative, some dude that Ruth doesn't know, and you know, we're supposed to recognize here that Ruth kind of digs Boaz. She thinks he's pretty keen, and would like to marry Boaz. But first, they have to go talk to this other relative. Okay, and that takes us to chapter 4, the marriage. So redemption refused. In order to buy the land, the Redeemer must marry Ruth. Okay, so in order to buy the land, whoever the Redeemer is, the Redeemer must marry Ruth and give her deceased husband a rightful heir. So get married to Ruth and they have to have a son. That son is the rightful heir of the deceased husband. And that keeps the land in the family. So they go to this closer relative who is unnamed. He is closer relative than Boaz is, and they say, "Hey, do you want this land?" And at first the guy says, "Yeah, that'd be good." Then they say, "Well, to get the land, you have to marry Ruth." He goes, "You know what? My wife would probably have a problem with me marrying Ruth," so he refuses to marry Ruth. Then the right of redemption, kinsman redeemer, goes to Boaz. Redemption at last. This frees Boaz to marry Ruth. This is a happy ending to this story. Boaz and Ruth get married and they have Obed. O-B-E-D. All right. Obed is the father of Jesse in the Bible, and Jesse is the father of King David. So what would that make Ruth? Ruth is David's great-grandmother, King David's great-grandmother. So let's look at that verse 4:14, Ruth chapter 4, verse 14. So once Boaz marries Ruth, and they have Obed. Then the women of the town said to Naomi, "Praise Yahweh, who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in Israel." Obed. Obed. By the way, Boaz is Rahab and Solomon's son. So if you remember old Rahab from Canaan, from the Canaanite city Jericho, Boaz was her son. So Rahab is the mother-in-law, Rahab the Canaanite is the mother-in-law of Ruth the Moabitess, who was faithful to Naomi, who is an Israelite from the tribe of Judah. And uh, Boaz and Ruth have a son named Obed, and he is the grandfather of King David. So here are the lessons we get from this. First, we learn the importance of faithfulness. It is important to be faithful to your responsibilities. It is important to be faithful to your relatives. It is important to be faithful to the law. Most of all, she was faithful to God. Society should care for helpless widows and orphans. Society, especially religious society, those who love God, should care for the truly downtrodden. It's just a challenge sometimes to find truly downtrodden people. But in the ancient world, that would be widows. The third lesson, God blesses all nations who come to him in faith. If you are tracking, Rahab was not an Israelite, but she had faith in God, and God blessed her. Ruth was not an Israelite. She was from Moab, but she trusted God, and he blessed her. God blesses all nations who come to him in faith. Look what it says in Ruth chapter 4, verse 10. With the land I have acquired Ruth, Moabite, widow of Mahlon. Mahlon is the name of her husband, to be my wife. This is Boaz talking. With this land I have acquired Ruth, Moabite, widow of Mahlon, to be my wife. This way she can have a son to carry on the family name, that is the family of Elimelech and Mahlon, of her dead husband, and to inherit family property here in his hometown. You are all witnesses today. So this is Boaz standing before the men of the town, saying, what does it mean for me to be the kinsman redeemer? Very important verse. So teachings about God. God brings Ruth into the family of faith. When Ruth seeks God, though she is not born an Israelite, God brings her into the family of faith. Second, God doesn't forget Naomi and brings her from despair to joy in her old age. It says that in chapter 4. God brings Naomi from despair to joy in her old age. So teachings about humanity. For once, these are good teachings about humanity. Most of what we see is rebellion against God. But Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz all demonstrate chesed, faithful loyalty. Chesed is the Hebrew word. You would spell that C-H-E-S-E-D, chesed, which is faithful loyalty. All of these characters are faithful and loyal. Teachings about salvation. Like Rahab, Ruth is a very unlikely convert to faith in God. Normally, we would say no way for Ruth to come to faith in God, but she seeks God. Ruth typifies salvation through faith. Ruth is brought back from bad possibilities and prospects and becomes an ancestor of Jesus. Like Rahab, an ancestor of Jesus. Here are the themes. Faithful loyalty, which is chesed in Hebrew. So faithful loyalty. Redeemer, which means to buy back, to redeem something. Something is lost, something is gone, something is enslaved, something or somebody. It is bought back. It is redeemed. There's a contrast that goes on in this. Ruth is a poor, desperate female foreigner, non-Israelite, is contrasted with Boaz. Boaz is a wealthy male Israelite. If you remember, we contrasted in the book of Joshua, we contrasted Rahab with Achan. And in that case, Rahab did good and turned to God in faith. Achan rebelled against God. And one got the reward. The Canaanite got the reward and the blessing, and the Israelite got the punishment. Here, thankfully, both of them are good, but there's still a contrast. Both show faithful loyalty in this case. Okay, so that is the notes for the book of Ruth. I'll expect you to have these notes written down, and I will check them. They will be part of your exam required. So make sure you get these notes, and I will see you on Thursday.